There's a conversation going on about preaching and plagiarism, and of course, I need to dip an oar into those waters. A few years ago, I guess when I was last with a bunch of my colleague homileticians, we were hearing from church judicatory leaders that this had become an issue, preaching and plagiarism. What was happening, it seems, is that pastors were downloading sermons and preaching them as their own, and congregants who had other issues with their pastors were Googling phrases from the sermons and finding, oh my, there they are. The sermon my pastor preached is on the internet. And so the pastors were confronted with this, not only for their dishonesty in downloading a sermon and claiming it as their own, but also for their use of time. What are you doing if you're not writing sermons? And we were hearing that people were being forced to resign. Pastors were being forced to resign. They were losing their calls over preaching and plagiarism. I've become so concerned about preaching and plagiarism that when one of my assistants does boundary workshops for our synod, we do a section on boundaries and the pulpit, things that I've asked to be put in that I don't present, but that are presented, including plagiarism, sermons from the internet, if you will, and personal disclosure from the pulpit, which is another problem. And then how do you use pastoral experiences in preaching in ways that don't embarrass or betray the congregation? So it is a real issue. And some of the reasons I think it's an issue is we have always all borrowed from each other as preachers. There's an old saying that I heard early on that once something is said, it becomes the property of the church. And I have taught that preaching is not a solo act. Sermons are born in community. And so we have groups of pastors that meet to study pericopes every Tuesday or Wednesday. And, ideas are birthed that may be heard in more than one sermon. We write commentaries in books and in places on like Working Preacher. So we all have benefited from the thoughts of others. So the issue, I don't think, is so much having our sermons informed by others. It's claiming others' work as our own, and that gets difficult. Figuring out how to do that. It's gotten so much more tempting and so much easier to claim others' work as our own with the internet, because we can simply cut and paste. And so we can take an idea and just paste it into our sermon, and somehow it becomes ours. I'm told that there are websites called Saturday Night Specials, where pastors can go and download whole sermons. And I think what happens is the pastor gets in a bind and downloads a sermon and preaches it, and it goes okay, and then it gets tempting to do that again. My friend Anna Carter Florence, who teaches preaching at Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, I've heard her say that the internet is heroin to a preacher. The internet is heroin to a preacher, because once you start downloading sermons, you're addicted. So we need to not do that. The other issue is, how do you credit others in preaching? The footnotes that are in my books really don't sound well. And I don't think people are looking for full footnotes as you preach. So you might say, a commentator has said X. Or this week, I read an article by Craig Satterley who observes. That's the kind of the way to do it. And then to be ready with the complete footnote or web link if anyone comes to you. And it's okay to say, I don't know that right now, Sunday after worship, but if you drop me an email, I'm happy to provide you a link. so that people can go read for themselves, or that it's a way of acknowledging somebody else's work. It's not a full footnote, but in the text you can just say the commentator said, or Satterley said, or whatever you need to say there. The danger, I think, happens when we say that too often. I hear a lot of my friend Dave Lose in the meantimes quoted in a lot of sermons. And that's great, because Dave's a really smart guy. But if the whole sermon is Dave Lose said, Dave Lose said, Dave Lose said, Dave Lose said, then people are going to figure out pretty quick that you're summarizing a blog post. And you might as well just hand out the blog post. Because I have really come to believe what the people of God are looking for is a word from God through their preacher, through their pastor. So while others may inform that word for us, I believe people are less concerned with what the people who are informing us say is what we think, what we believe, what are we bearing witness to, which I guess leads me to the way I teach preaching. And if you want to see some of that, you can go to my webpage. CraigASatterley.com is my website. And if you hit preach, all my lecture notes from my preaching class are there. And there I tell students, don't run to the commentators too quickly. Don't run to the commentators too quickly. We need to spend our own time immersed in the scriptures, prayerfully doing our own study. Then when we go to the commentaries, whether they're books or online, we don't do that as like sponges soaking up water, but as colleagues who are engaging others in conversation. And then the commentaries, rather than telling us what to preach, they kind of inform what we think. So they really are collegial relationships. This, of course, means that in order to spend quality time in God's Word before we preach, that means we need to start our sermons early in the week. And that websites like Saturday Night Specials really would be of no value to us. Finally, the last thing I'd say about plagiarism is there are times when the best thing that we might need to do is to share someone else's sermon. So we may decide that the best thing to preach at the Easter Vigil is a sermon from one of the fathers. Then we just say that this sermon on the Easter Vigil from John Chrysostom really spoke to my heart, really speaks to my heart this Easter. And so I am delighted to share it with you, and to do so confidently that the good news will be transmitted and celebrated and received through these words. There again, you can't do it too often, but when you do it honestly and confidently. So I had heard about this conversation going on about preaching and plagiarism, and I just needed to be engaged. So I thank you for indulging me. Peace.